Hi, I'm Meghan Bonczkowski, and this is my report from a systems perspective on food waste in the production stage. I'd like to start off by defining food loss as a decrease in mass or nutritional value of food that was originally intended for human consumption. About 1/3 of the global food supply gets wasted, resulting in over 3,300 megatons of carbon dioxide emissions per year. In addition to carbon dioxide, rotting food produces methane, which is another harmful greenhouse gas that is actually 84 times more potent than carbon for the first 20 years after its release. So even though methane does not stay in the atmosphere for as long as carbon, it does more damage during its period there. If food waste was a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter behind the US and China. So now that we've established that food waste is a significant issue, let's break down the food supply chain. There are 4 categories: production, transportation, packaging and distribution, and consumption. I will be focusing on production and harvesting stages for my presentation and paper, and it is also in this stage that the majority of food loss occurs. Some common causes of food loss and waste. 20% of produce, about 1 in every 5 fruits and vegetables, is rejected due to irregular shapes and colors, essentially cosmetic flaws. There are quality standards that cause consumers to reject perfectly good to eat produce simply because it's misshapen or discolored. Other causes of production stage food loss include bad weather, pests, labor and production costs, processing issues, unstable markets, and food safety scares. Farmers are impacted by changing immigration laws, which often result in labor shortages, and that is an issue that doesn't get a lot of attention. But a large portion of their workforce are the people who are most directly affected by some of these changes in the law. Another cause of food loss is drastic changes in supply and demand, such as in the case of a global pandemic. This leads me to the research questions that guided my project. First, knowing that 1/3 of the global food supply gets wasted, and a rough estimate of 70% of food waste happens in the production stage, what are the best ways to limit production stage food loss and waste? And my follow-up question is, what are the biggest obstacles affecting implementation of these food waste reduction strategies? My methodology for my research, I relied heavily on prior data found on reliable, relevant websites like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Agricultural Organization, and I also used a lot of peer-reviewed articles from scientific journals, and I've included a few here on this slide. This brings me to my diagram. So as I stated earlier, I am focusing on only one stage in the food supply chain, so the real diagram would be significantly larger and more complex. But for the production and harvesting stage, I've split it into internal and external contributing factors, or anthropogenic and natural causes. So I'd like to start down here where we have these external causes: market crisis, such as pandemic, and labor shortages result in a delay of product supply and demand. This can have one of 2 effects. It can either result in product surplus, leading to food loss and waste, or product shortage, which results in food scarcity. Crop failure also contributes to food scarcity, and pests, diseases, changing climate trends, and natural disasters because of changing climate trends, all of these things cause crop failure, which results in, as I said, food scarcity or food loss and waste. Crop failure can also recontribute to changing climate, as it efforts to address crop failure or change land use can result in indirect climate change. Climate change can also causes a lack of resources, which in turn causes more climate change trends, and this leads again to more food loss and waste. Now jumping to internal causes, we have cosmetic flaws like we discussed earlier, and also inadequate infrastructure such as outdated machinery and technology. Once you have this bundle of food loss and waste here, it results in strategies to try to reduce it, which cost money, and that money then goes towards better technology, improved infrastructure, and eventually standardized food loss and waste indices, which we will return to later. And this is where the reduction really starts to occur. So just a recap on anthropogenic or internal contributing factors: insufficient infrastructure and technology, inefficient energy and water use, improper storage and cooling, harvesting techniques, quality and aesthetic standards, labor cost and availability, and changing prices. Natural or external contributing factors include pests, disease, severe weather events such as storms, floods, droughts, etc., and a lack of necessary resources. Some recent strategies to reduce food loss and waste. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, formed in 2015, was a list of 17 goals to be accomplished by the year 2030. And the 12th goal highlights a commitment to responsible consumption and production, reducing global food waste by 30% per capita, and decreasing food loss in the production and supply chain. One of the ways this goal is meant to be achieved is through the forming of two indices that I referred to earlier. The Food Waste Index measures tons of food waste per capita from processing through to consumption stages. The Food Loss Index measures food loss along the supply chain from production through to processing. So the Food and Agriculture Organization and United Nations have combined their efforts to complete these two indices by the year 2030, and the goal would be a standardized measuring system of food loss and waste. Another recent strategy, the EPA started the Food Recovery Challenge, which is a voluntary incentive program in which organizations and businesses set data-driven goals, implement targeted strategies to reduce wasted food in their operations, and report results to compete for annual recognition from the EPA. There are no financial incentives. It's just a collaboration of businesses and individuals seeking to reduce food waste. And one of the ways that this challenge is achieved is through public education of the food recovery hierarchy, which is pictured here. So the EPA created this hierarchy in terms of most preferred to least preferred methods of dealing with food loss. So at the top, the most preferred is source reduction, reducing surplus, then feeding hungry people, feeding animals, industrial uses, composting, and then lastly, the least preferred method, landfill and incineration. Another strategy that I am particularly fond of is FarmLink, which is a nonprofit organization that was started earlier this year by U.S. college students in response to COVID-19. So what FarmLink does is it creates a direct link between farms and food banks in order to respond to both farmer and community needs. It's reducing food loss and waste in the production stage by reducing the amount of unharvested food and surplus that farmers either have no buyers for or lack proper storage to keep themselves. And also, the project addresses community needs in a rising food crisis. According to FarmLink's website, they have delivered over 12 million pounds of food this year and claim also to have helped prevent nearly 16 million pounds of carbon dioxide emissions, although I was unable to verify if that included transportation emissions. Another strategy to reduce food loss, community-supported agriculture. So in this model, community members purchase shares in a farmer's crops at the beginning of the season. In this way, farmers are financially supported all year round, and they can buy the seeds or the fertilizer or whatever they need to just focus on growing a good yield. Members get weekly goods from the farm, And there's a couple different payment structures. They can pay all up front, or they can pay in installments, or they can work with the farmer to establish a labor for food system. One of the best things about this is that it's a really flexible, customizable plan that involves input from multiple stakeholders. It builds community relationships through shared risks and benefits, and just really benefits everyone that's involved. There are over 2,500 CSAs in the USA, and it's growing in popularity, and rightfully so. Some obstacles to food loss waste reduction. The biggest one would be data deficiency and inconsistency. There's a lack of available research in underdeveloped countries, largely due to outdated technology. The inability to accurately track food loss and waste makes the data inconsistent and deficient. There's also a lack of specificity. A lot of times when food loss is tracked, it's for this whole supply chain as opposed to focusing in on different stages and creating specific strategies to deal with those stages. Also, there's a lot of outdated information out there because there is no standardized method of measurement for food loss and waste. Another obstacle is cost. Preventative strategies are expensive, and implementing them can sometimes cost more than the people who would benefit from it can afford to pay. Technology updates is a common preventative strategy, and as we all know, technology is not cheap. So this can be a significant obstacle to implementing preventative strategies. So my conclusion here is food loss and waste contribute to both food scarcity and climate change, and they are both reinforcing factors. Some promising strategies to address food loss and waste include the community-supported agriculture and farm-to-food bank models. Standardizing food loss and waste measurement through the Food Loss Index and the Food Waste Index will help facilitate policy changes. And lastly, strategies to mitigate food loss and waste must carefully consider the cost-benefit ratio to make sure that the people who are benefiting from the reduced waste model are not spending more than they can afford to implement those strategies. The last few slides are just lists of my references that I used for my research. As mentioned earlier, most of these are peer-reviewed scientific articles, and that's all. So thank you very much for watching.